I was recently made a lead developer at the company I currently work for and was asked to specifically lead up two areas, security and third-party apps. So I thought, what better way to teach security to my team than to create an insecure third-party app? Now, the main system that we all work with is ServiceNow. So I wanted to do something very specific to ServiceNow. It's not something I've ever seen done before. So I created SNOWStorm, which is a ServiceNow-specific capture the flag challenge. Now, the company I work for also has an online portal which interfaces with ServiceNow. So I basically recreated that functionality as close as I could, trimmed it all down so it's much more simple, and built it in a very insecure way to try and demonstrate some of the potential issues you might face. So in the video, I'm going to cover all three challenges and how they're solved. It's also completely open source, so if anyone has a ServiceNow team or they just want to work with a CTF specifically designed for ServiceNow, you can just clone this repository, follow the instructions, and run it yourself and see if you can complete the challenges. Now, interestingly enough, about a month after I created this challenge, I found a real-world vulnerability in a real-world ServiceNow instance, which actually closely followed some of the logic from one of these challenges. Now, I'm going to do a separate video to explain that bug that I found and exactly how it worked. So for this video, I'm just going to focus on the CTF. But if you do want to see that, then I recommend you subscribe and you can see that video when it comes out. So let's log into our account. So if we log in, now we are greeted on the home page. Now this page just gives a lot of beginner-friendly CTF advice and things like that, but we don't really need to pay attention to any of that. I will sort of talk through as we go through the application. But there is one thing we do want to note, which is that this is extremely beginner-friendly. It's focused on people who have no experience in security whatsoever. They just need an understanding of ServiceNow and a logical thinking brain. So yeah, don't come into this thinking we've got anything mind-blowing. This is just purely what you see in the UI is all we need to do. We just have to abuse the logic. There are no tools you need. You don't need to enumerate. You don't need to guess anything. It's just a purely logic-based challenge. So let's move on to challenge one, right? So this is kind of what the portal will look like. We can get those tickets here and we can look at the challenge brief. So here at the challenge brief, it says, we're an employee of Little Company Inc. and this is your online portal to view tickets. This portal will make a request to the ServiceNow instance's incident table and return the data to the user via this portal. On this instance, there is a secret ticket belonging to a different company on the incident table containing the challenge flag. Find a way to abuse the functionality on this page and retrieve the flag and submit it by clicking Submit Flag. That's up here. So let's look at what that looks like on the ServiceNow side of things. So this is the incident table, and these are the tickets that we can see here, right? We can change the impact via these buttons, and we can see what we're seeing here. But there is this secret ticket here. But if we check that company field, we'll see that actually it's specifically given to this company called Big Company Inc. So we need to get this secret ticket despite the fact that it doesn't belong to Little Company Inc. Now, one thing to mention is these blue sections here. So these blue sections are kind of what I refer to as the looking glass. So a real portal application obviously wouldn't give you this kind of information about what the back end is doing, right? But as I said, this is designed for newbies. We don't want there to be any kind of hidden logic, any kind of, magic going on in the back end that people can't get their head around. So I just give that back via these blue sections so that people can see exactly what request the back end is doing and what the response data was. So what the request was that it made and what the response was, if it was a GET request, that sort of thing. And the same goes for these free text fields. An application probably would look more like just these buttons here. It wouldn't give you access to actually free text, change the value here. But remember, this is HTTP. We could change that value anyway. HTTP would just accept any value that we could attempt to give to the server. So this is, again, just to make things easier for noobs coming into this so that they can just free text edit it here. So they don't have to use something like Burp Suite. But let's get back to the core functionality, right? So we know that we're trying to get this ticket, right? This secret ticket that belongs to Big Company Inc. But we can see that in our query, it's already doing a filter, right? It's checking before it even tries to get the impact. It's checking, is the company equal to, and then it passes in the sysid of Little Company Inc. So one thing that people often note is that this limit, it goes directly onto the end of the URL. Whatever we put in here ends up on the end of the URL, which means that we could tag on any kind of extra parameter we want. Now, looking through the docs, there isn't really really any interesting extra parameter that we could do. However, there are more interesting parameters that are already defined. So for example, this syspalm query parameter. What if we just added our own syspalm query parameter and then it would take it from that instead, right? So let's try that. So if we add on and syspalm query equals, and then let's do just active equals true, so that we'll just get everything back that's active, right? So if we try this, it doesn't work. Now the reason this doesn't work is that the web server is looking for the first occurrence of that. So it's always going to take the first one, and our one gets ignored. So that's a total dead end. So there's no interesting parameters we can add, and we can't seem to edit any existing parameters since it goes from left to right. So what if we look at the actual parameter value? So our value here, we're inside of this syspalm query. So if we do or, and then let's just say we want to do or impact equals 2. And now we can see that we are getting all of the times that we get impact 3 or 2. So it is working correctly. We can do an or here. So now we know we can inject our own glide query into this syspalm query parameter. Let's see if we can do something more interesting. So instead of doing this impact equals 3 or impact equals 2, why don't we try and or this company part so that we can get the other company's ticket details, right? So let's say we want to do or, and let's say we don't know the name of the other company. We'll just say or company is not empty. Now this should filter us anytime where the company isn't empty. Let's see if this works. Well, no, it doesn't work. But what's interesting, we're now getting back 1, 2, and 3 by adding that. So what exactly is going on? So let's use the UI to help us here kind of visualize what's going on. So this is basically the query we are running, and you could kind of already see the issue. We're setting company is equal to little company Inc. That's something out of our control. Impact is equal to 3, or company is not empty. So that or is running against this impact part, right? So either this is true or this is true. And since this company is not empty part is always true, it's returning us everything. So now how do we get an or here that is going to affect the top part of this query? Well, there is one or that we haven't touched, and that's this or at the top here, right? So this gives us the ability to set or all of these conditions are met. So if we change this, and then let's just do something simple. Let's say active is true, since we already know that they're always going to be set to true. So if we run this, now we can see we get all of the data here, because either this entire query is true or this entire query is true. So if we just copy the query, now let's look at exactly what this looks like. So let's go back to our page. So it's saying company is equal to this and this and this. That's fine. That's already set for us. And impact is equal to 3. So that would be where our input is starting here on the value 3. And now we can see this NQ. Now that actually stands for new query. So that's exactly what it's doing. It's saying either this whole query or this new query is true. So then we say or NQ active is equal to true. Let's try and get all the tickets, and here we go. We have our secret flag. So if we take that and we submit it over here, good, challenge 1 is now complete. So let's move straight into challenge 2, and let's again look at the challenge brief. So for this challenge, your goal again is to find the secret ticket belonging to another company, just like what we did before. However, this time the previous method has been disabled, so we need to find a new way of doing that. So now we don't have access to change impact at all, but we do have access to this limit, right? To decide how many tickets we pull back. But what can we do with that? So now we can see that the value we're passing into limit is ending up here at the beginning of the parameters in the URL. Now, don't we remember we already looked into this being a possibility to set multiple parameters in the same URL, since it looks for the leftmost occurrence, right? So syspalm query is defined over here, but let's say we want to set it at the beginning and set our own. So let's try that out. If we just have a limit of, let's say 15 tickets to make sure we grab everything, and then we just try to add our own parameter here. We just use syspalm query equals, and then let's just say active equals true. That will get us all the active tickets. We could obviously add anything more on. Active is true, active is false, whatever it is, to get all the tickets we want, but we can see that it works. It goes from left to right. And if we submit the flag, it's now challenge 2 completed. Now this might seem a little bit strange, right? We were able to solve that challenge in like 2 minutes, and almost everybody who comes across this challenge solves it in 2 minutes. And I actually think that that's where the value is in this challenge, right? Because most people follow this exact path that we just took, which is to try that in challenge 1. This attack is called HTTP parameter pollution, and it's a totally valid thing to try in challenge 1, because not all web servers are looking for the first occurrence. Some of them are looking for the last occurrence. Some of them are doing their own custom thing. So it's a totally valid attack vector. It just doesn't work on the first challenge. And it takes people a little bit of time to even begin trying that in challenge 1, but eventually people do try it. But then when they see challenge 2 and they see how it works, immediately people know how to solve the issue. Even though nothing's really changed, it was just pure luck that it goes from first occurrence instead of the last occurrence. Now people are thinking from a security standpoint. People are thinking about security, and they already know of the potential issues, and they're able to identify them very quickly. And that's why I think challenge 2 is actually one of the most important challenges, because it really shows that just thinking about security, just having that in your mind when you're developing, immediately brings you to those security issues. If you're not thinking about them, they won't jump out at you. But the moment you start thinking, there it is, solved in 2 seconds. So challenge 3 is quite a bit more difficult. So let's read exactly what's required from challenge 3. So for this challenge, your goal is to gain access to a ServiceNow admin account. So it says upon logging into the instance, you'll be redirected to the page with the flag as required. It gives us the details of the admin user account and the sysid just to make things a little bit easier, and gives us the link to log in. This will obviously, we would be logged out. Now, all the get functionality that we had before has been completely disabled now, but we have this new functionality here to update tickets. So let's try a quick ticket update. Let's update the impact on this change request ticket here. So in the looking glass section, it really shows us exactly what's going on. So it made a put to this URL, and it gave us this body when it made that put. So we already know we're probably going to be wanting to pay attention to this put functionality. There's nothing we can do with the get functionality anyway, and we know that we're looking to write data and gain access to a ServiceNow account. So what exactly can we do with this put? Well, aside from changing the value, why don't we try and change one of the fields? Let's just go onto the ticket and pick a random field. This is just a random string called justification, right? So let's type in justification here, and let's just do the word test and see if that updates. Well, we got this 200 response, so everything should have gone okay. We can use the looking glass to confirm that. But if we want to be extra sure, let's look in the ServiceNow instance, and we see that it truly did work. But for people actually testing this, the looking glass should be simple enough to see that everything was updated. Okay, so we can update other values on this form, but how is that very useful? We only have access to this change request and what exists on that change request. So let's think about context for a second. So the context of this input is inside of the put body, right? Inside of a big JSON string. Well, what is the context of this value? Well, we can say that this value is ending up in the URL. So let's see if we try to change that. Does it in fact work? Yeah, we got a 404 because that record doesn't exist, and we can set whatever value we want. So the key thing here is to think about the context. Like I said, so we're inside of a path here, right? So what do we know about paths exactly? We already know that this is kind of the only one section of the entire path. But the problem that we're having is that we're stuck on this change request ticket, which is not very useful to us. Being on a change request doesn't help us. We want to get somewhere more juicy. But remember, this is a path. So why don't we do something to see if we can kind of break out of this change request? So although we're in the context of a path, remember we're in the kind of grander scheme of things. This is all one very big path, right? To go to API, now, table, change request. Now, is there something that we can add here? And it's something we can use to reroute this path? Well, there is. In pathing, we can use these relative path operators, right? So let's say we did ... that would say jump up a directory and start writing from that point. So instead of writing our input after the change request path, the ... reroutes it back up to this table path. So let's just test this out. If we try to go here, we can see we're getting a 405, right? It didn't like what we just tried to do. But if we try our theory, right, which is that we're able to start writing from after this table part, if we use the ... let's do ... and then we'll also just do change request, and we'll go straight back into that sysid, and we hit enter, and here we go. We got a 200 back. So we are able to successfully manipulate that path by jumping back and jumping back in and writing our sysid on the end. So now we know we can edit the path. Let's edit to something more useful, right? So the obvious one is going to be the sys user table, right? That's where user accounts exist. That's how we're going to gain access to the account that we want, right? So we have the sys ID that we're looking for here. Let's open this back up and let's go to sysuser / and then our specific user. Now let's say we're doing this CTF for real, right? How do we figure out that we're doing things correctly? Well, let's change the sys ID to something invalid. Let's just increment by 1 and let's try and update. We get a 404. Now let's try and change that back to a 0 and update, and now we're getting this 200. So we know we are genuinely successfully reaching this user account, which lives on this sys user table. So let's not forget, we're trying to gain access to the sys user table, and this is the password field. It's called a user_password, and we already know we can edit whatever field we want. So let's just do user_password, and let's just keep that value as test, right? So let's try that. Oh, good, we got a 200. So now we should have updated the password. Let's try and log in, right? So let's try and log in, and it doesn't work. So for some reason, what we tried didn't work, but we're not really sure why yet. Well, there's another way we could complete this, and that is to update the email field and set an email that we want, and then we come on here and then click on forgot password, type in the email that we just set to the account, and then reset the password to that email. Now, the problem with that is that most ServiceNow instances, they link to AD, and they tend not to allow people to request a forgotten password directly to ServiceNow because it's all syncing from AD anyway. So this functionality is rarely actually available in the real world. And aside from that, this is a developer instance, and email is really not the best, right? So maybe we can find a way to get that password working. Now, I'll tell you why the password didn't work. The reason is because it's a password field, right? So the value that ends up in the database needs to be hashed, right? Because we don't store passwords in plain text in 2021, right? So when ServiceNow basically you attempt to log in, it's going to hash the value that you gave to ServiceNow and compare it with the hashed password that exists in the database. But the password that exists in the database is not hashed. Well, you probably have already figured out, if you're a ServiceNow developer, that this is what we want, right? There is a parameter that we can add, which is syspalm input display value, and it basically indicates whether or not the value that you're passing in needs to be processed in some way before entering the database, or if you just want to put it directly in as the value that it's been given. And we do want it to be processed, right? We want that value to be hashed. So we want to set this to true. Now, the great thing is, again, think about the context, right? So we're inside of a path, but that doesn't really matter, right? Because in a URL, the path comes just before we set our parameters. So we can just add our parameter onto the end here, right? Syspalm input display value equals true. And now we can set our user password value, and we'll set it equal to test, and we'll update that, and we got a 200. So now let's go back and we will try and log in, and there we go. We successfully logged in and we completed challenge 3. So just to finish up, it's just a little simple CTF that I created for my colleagues, but I got such good feedback. People really enjoyed the challenge that I thought I would make it public and kind of share that around. And I do think it really has a lot of value for both ServiceNow developers, anyone who works with ServiceNow, and also when it comes to red teaming, because I think not many people are thinking about the potential when they're trying to, attack a target, that they might actually be speaking to a ServiceNow instance. Everyone tries for SQL injection, but nobody is trying for glide query injection, even though they're both, database query languages, right? So you shouldn't forget about that. And don't forget what I said earlier, I'll be releasing a video very soon about a real world bug that I found that very, very closely followed this kind of challenge, but it was a little bit different. So there's still a lot to learn in that regard, but yeah, this is real world stuff. This stuff really does happen. So yeah, subscribe and have a look.